Hello and welcome to the Boro Breakdown podcast, the Lowdown show on Micah Hamilton, Boro's brand new recruit, and he's came from Manchester City on a rumoured fee of £2 million. And there is a sell-on clause, of course, which is in the region of 20%, and Manchester City do have a buyback clause, which is a lot more than what Mills paid for him. So they are being rewarded for developing a player who they have got from Manchester City. And of course, Micah has joined us on a 4-year deal. And the 20-year-old is, of course, Manchester-born, attacking midfielder, is a graduate of Manchester City Academy. You may have seen him play for Manchester City last season in the Champions League in that one-off game against Red Star Belgrade, indeed, where he scored. And then you'll see that clip a little bit later on. But Micah has played that number 10 role for England, but also he's played out wide as well. And in terms of Michael Carrick and what he thought of Boro's new recruit, he said that Micah is an exciting young player who we're looking forward to working with. He's already been in and around the senior team at Manchester City, and he's got that experience from playing in the Champions League, and he's another great addition to the squad. So he is Boro's fourth official signing of the summer window, of course. But what do we think of him? You know, he's definitely a player who I've found really, really difficult to gain a lot of data from because, you know, he hasn't had much first-team experience. He hasn't been on loan. There's not much data points on him. He hasn't really played many games. He has been playing for Manchester City in the pre-season games as well. And, you know, when you are seeing these type of players, I think there is that natural excitement, of course, that you do tend to see a player come from an academy like Manchester City. And with that as well, you will naturally think, wow, okay, we've got a gem straight away. He played for Manchester City a couple of times. You know, we've paid a couple million for him, and the sky could potentially limit. And you know what? You should definitely think that because with these young talents that do come in at this point of a window, but also when they do make that first big move, there's going to naturally be excitement. But for Middlesbrough, it's an opportunity here because there's a high ceiling on the player, but also you get to develop him, and also you're not paying too much for a player who was just making his first senior appearances. But in terms of a player, and you know, it's quite difficult because when I was looking at him, and like I mentioned just there wasn't that much data that I could really pull from. There wasn't that many clips. I was in Y-Scout, I was looking. There was only really 5 or 6 or 7 clips that I could actually go for. But within that time, I was able to kind of hopefully pinpoint a player who he actually reminded me of. And there was someone who played for Middlesbrough, who came from Manchester City, who left Middlesbrough in the January window, and that was Morgan Rogers. Morgan Rogers and Micah Hamilton, for me, I thought there was some similarities in the play, to be honest. Both players are really good at dribbling. Both players were good in getting one-on-one with defenders, good at getting in behind, and also have that versatility to play in also that number 10 role and also out wide as well. And also when I looked at his heat maps as well, when this is Morgan Rogers at Middlesbrough as well, where Rogers would just float into that central place, and of course he played up front for a little while as well. And it just meant that he was able to float. But also, when you see with Hamilton, when he has played for Manchester City this season, it has been out wide, but he has been making those runs inverted and also getting into central areas. And then just looking at his numbers as well. When you looked at Hamilton, and this is where it's really difficult to look at numbers. And I don't want you to look at this and go, oh, wow, okay, he's got a really high percentage passes in Hamilton. Would you expect that from a Manchester City team? But also his loss index was quite high as well, which means he's probably just going to take a bit more high risk when he's going and running up players. But in terms of how I thought of him, and this is where it was really interesting for me because we've brought in a player now who can be a direct winger, which I personally think we've needed on that left-hand side for probably another while because it just adds another layer to Boro's play, right? Because these best teams, they have multiple layers of attack. They have players who can play multiple positions, who can change the game. And then also we can stretch teams, and in-game changes can be the best thing that you could potentially have for a team and during games as well, because you're able to change the flow of the game, you're able to change your shape. And I think this is kind of where I think we could potentially see it. So at the moment, Boro definitely play with that box midfield, right? And, you know, we see Riley McGree coming central with Finn Azaz, and that's all about control for me. That control of the middle of the pack. I always find that you have that really good strength, and you most of the time, if you control the center of the pitch, you're probably going to get the right result at the end of it. And we definitely tend to see that with Riley McGree. That normally gives Lucas Engel the ability to get up on the left-hand side. Also with Luke Ayling on the right, Boro try and use the fullbacks to really try and create that width. But in terms of how Hamilton and how we could potentially operate, this really intrigued me. And although we're going to chat about Isaiah Jones in a moment, I took Riley McGree out of the squad and put Hamilton there because this could potentially be an option which we might see in terms of Boro potentially changing the shape, but also in the game as well. And where will these runners come from? And what Hamilton is very, very good at is being direct, and that is that direct running behind. So you've got Latte making that direct run, Hamilton making that direct run. Jones likes to make that arch run into the back post, and also Lucas Engel and Luke Ayling as well can create that really direct approach with Boro. They really make those direct runs and cause a team problems and really pin those fullbacks back. But also, if you're playing against a team who have slow fullbacks, there's probably nothing worse than having Isaiah Jones, Latte and Hamilton really running at you and direct with pace as well. But also in terms of that versatility, which I mentioned earlier, going to that 2-4-4 in possession, and you've seen Middlesbrough play this a lot of the time under Matt Carrick's either a 4-2-4 or 2-4-4 based on where you are on the pitch in terms of possession, how advanced the game is. And you're seeing teams more and more now float between these different formations during possession and phases, and that's just not how the game's progressed, really. But this will allow Hamilton, to stay wide and pin the fullback back. Okay, you are giving up a little bit of space in the middle where if you were to put Finn as in a more of a central position. But also it would create an option for actually Middlesbrough to potentially go down the inverted wing-back route where you would see a Lucas Engel or an Ayling make that inverted run and support like Elaf whilst Hamilton would stay wide and maybe make that archer run in the middle. But then finally on top of that as well, if you were to play Hamilton in that left-hand side role, and a certain somebody, came back and played at that left wing back role, and Middlesbrough moved back to that infamous 3-2-5. You never know that Middlesbrough could go back to that route, and you could see a ball get into the box for that laugh by a certain Ryan Giles. But do we really see Hamilton playing on the left-hand side? That is probably the question. I did use him there in terms of adding Middlesbrough's layers in attack because we definitely need it. But realistically, will he play on the right and will he give Isaiah Jones that competition? Because Isaiah Jones has needed competition for a while, right? When we're looking at him, we're thinking, who is that right winger that can really compete? Marcus Forss is out injured. He hasn't really had that competition. And what strives better performance out of a player? It is definitely competition. And Isaiah Jones just hasn't had it. And I think that's fairly honest assessment, I think, for any Boro fan to really look at that. But when I looked at Isaiah Jones and I looked at Hamilton in terms of the heat maps and where they really make those runs, they're very similar. They're really similar. Both of them like to get that archer run. Yes, they are on different wings. And Jones likes to really get in behind. But I would say what the key differences are between them, yes, they are on the heat maps. They're staying out wide. A Pep team likes to keep his wingers out wide and make those inverted runs from the fullbacks. But in terms of Middlesbrough, actually, we tend to keep Isaiah Jones out wide, and that provides our width with another winger. And really, it would actually work for Hamilton if he was to switch on that right-hand side. But what I would say is the key differences between Jones and Hamilton is, yes, they're both direct. Yes, they can both run at defenders, but Jones is much, much better at that give and go, where I think Hamilton is probably a better player at getting in behind and taking a man on one-on-one. And that is just from the data that I've seen and the videos that we've seen and the clips that I showed earlier in the video. But I think football's going to change. I think this is a really good and shrewd sign because, in my opinion, I think as football is starting to go through phases, we've seen multiple phases over the last few years, from possession based to having inverted wingers to inverted centre backs. In terms of like centre backs, playing on left back and right back, and then moving inwards. You've seen a left back player left wing at that for Manchester City. And we've also seen the very famous Tony Pulis, where you just play a load of centre mids and centre backs and hope for the best. But I think the next iteration in football is actually probably more dribbly boys and bringing it back the out and out winger. And I think that is a really cool place to be in, because there's nothing better. I think for a fan where a winger takes on his man, whips a ball in the box, and the striker heads it in the back of the net. But that's where I think the game is probably starting to move. It's definitely been over the last couple of years. You've seen more and more dribbly type wingers come into the sides, and I think we'll see more and more of that over the next couple of years. But what do I think of the deal, and what do I think of this deal? Because it's a signing that I haven't had much data on. It's definitely a player that Boro have watched, and they've watched for a considerable amount of time, but I've not really had that privilege to do it. I've only seen Wirescout, I've collated some views, I've looked at the data, I've shown you the data, but what do I think of it? I'm actually really happy with it. I think there's it's £2 million. There's a high ceiling. And for Middlesbrough, you can develop a player right now, and if he does well, you can sell him on for big money. You can sell him for Manchester City, and you'll make about 20 million. You've developed the player for 2 or 3 years. You've made really good profit. If he doesn't go to Manchester City, or Manchester City don't want him, the ceiling could be higher, right? But if it doesn't work and it takes him time to develop, you've got him on a 4-year deal to develop. You can send him on loan. It's a really good investment. And if it doesn't work out, you've only really paid 1 to 2 million for him. And in the grand schemes of football these days, we paid very similar for Morgan Rogers, and we've seen how well that deal did. And sometimes you get a Matthew Hoppe in it where it just hasn't really worked. And for us, you're only paying 1 to 2 million. You can't really fall off with that, to be honest. I don't think you can fall off of it at all. And naturally, like I said at the start of the show, it's one of those signings where if he comes from Manchester City, you're going to be excited by it. You might not have seen him. You're going to be excited by it. But from the data that I've shown, from the clip that I've seen, which was very limited, from my thoughts in terms of Middlesbrough potentially changing shape, having an out-and-out winger who can stay wide and cause problems, the dynamic that you can maybe have in the shape, I think it's a good signing. And if I was to rank this signing out of 5, remember I gave Lucas Engel 5 out of 5, but I was excited at the time, and I still like Lucas Engel, but I'm not going to make that same mistake again. For me, I think this signing is a 3 out of 5. It can be whatever you want it to be. This could be a fantastic, phenomenal signing in 2 years, or it could just be something that doesn't work out. I think this is one end of the spectrum or the other, and I can't really make that call. So I'm sitting on the fence and giving this a 3 out of 5. But what I can say is that I do think we have a decent player here. When I looked at him at Saturday when he was warming up, I looked at his build and I thought, you know what? You've got a bit of that strength about you. You're direct. You're not that Adama in terms of where he was absolutely rapid and taking lots of players on, but he had that good stature, that really good upbringing in terms of football at being at Manchester City Academy. He's played under Pep. He's played with the best players. He's definitely developed his game. He's got some really good attributes, although I've only seen a limited amount of data, but there's teams and the scouts that have seen a lot more of him, and there's a lot of excitement. You even seen in Michael Carrick's face, and he doesn't get excited a lot, but he got excited by this signing, and I think that might say a lot with this signing for us. But anyway, what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the Boro Breakdown channel. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast provider. And don't forget to vote for us at the FCAs as well, and try and help us get that gold this year. But for right now, this has been the Boro Breakdown podcast, and that was all your Micah Hamilton chatter in a pod. Up the Boro Breakdown.